All right. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. I am Stephanie Hines and I have the utmost pleasure of welcoming everyone. I'm the children's manager at Print a Bookstore in Portland, Maine. And today we are here to celebrate our Read with Pride panel featuring Bill Konigsberg, Leah Johnson, Lucas Hoysha, and Alice Osman with our moderator, David Levithan. As I mentioned, my name is Stephanie Hines, and I just had a few quick words before we got started. So while this year's Pride celebration won't include parades or public gatherings, I am deeply honored to be hosting these amazing authors and all of our attendees this evening. The queer community is at its core adaptable. There is a long history of trying to prevent queer celebrations, and gathering today is a testament of perseverance. Of course, Pride as we know it could not exist without the courageous acts of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, two transgender women of color who were among the first to fight back against the police violence during what is now known as the Stonewall Riots or Stonewall Uprising. Especially in light of current events where both Black and transgender communities continue to come under attack, I want to take this moment to thank Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, and many activists who have come before and after them, and all their work that has allowed these books to not only exist, but to be celebrated. Before I introduce our panelists, I wanted to cover a few quick housekeeping details. Following the panel discussion, we're going to be opening the floor to an audience Q&A. If you look to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button where you can submit questions. And if you're joining us through our Facebook live stream, you can comment your questions there and one of our staff members will forward it to be included. And of course, all of our panelists' books are for sale on printbookstore.com. I will be linking to that page in the chat function once I've finished our introduction. Without any further ado, I have the honor of introducing our panelists. Bill Konigsberg is the author of The Music of What Happens and 5 other YA titles. Prior to turning his attention to writing books for teens, Bill was a sports writer and editor for the Associated Press and ESPN.com. He lives in Phoenix, Arizona with his husband. Leah Johnson's debut novel is You Should See Me in a Crown. She is a writer, editor, and eternal Midwesterner currently residing in Brooklyn, New York. Lucas Hoysha is a librarian living in Sao Paulo, Brazil. He received his MS in Information Science from Fluminense Federal University in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Where We Go From Here is his first novel. Alice Osman is an author, illustrator from Kent, England. She has written 4 YA novels and a graphic novel series, Heartstoppers, which was originally published as a webcomic. And our moderator today is David Levithan. When not writing during his spare hours on weekends, he is a publisher and editorial director at Scholastic and the founding editor of the Push imprint, which is devoted to finding new voices and new authors in teen literature. And without further ado, I will pass it over to David to get our panel started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thank you to Print for having us. Again, something I will say a lot during this panel is please, please support your independent bookstores, in particular Print, and support these authors and their books by buying as many copies as you can from Print. It really is amazing to be here and to be partnering with such a great bookstore to have this Read with Pride event. Stephanie also touched upon something I think we all wanted to sort of say from the get-go, which is that it is a Read with Pride event, but we want to acknowledge that pride is about feeling pride with every part of your identity and respecting the identities of everybody around you, in particular, Black and trans people who, again, as Stephanie said, have been under particular attack recently, but also historically have been under very, very much attack. And again, we just want to say that while we celebrate queer pride, we also know that our struggle for pride and for equality is not over until there is equality for everybody, and everybody can take pride and seen equally in the eyes of both the law and society. So with that in mind, again, I do want to celebrate these 4 authors and their books because their books really are just wonderful and take us to different parts of queer identity in just such bold, wonderful ways. And it's a great cross-section of where queer YA literature is now to have these 4 amazing creators with us. So I love all four of these books so much. It makes it so easy to be the host of a panel when you've read and loved all of the books. Heartstopper, again, just made me swoon the first time I read it, and then the second time I read it, and then the third time I read it. It's just one of the most sweetest, tender love stories between two boys I have read in any medium in the past 2 years. And so it's wonderful to have Alice with us. Bill, again, just continues to astonish me with his range and his passion. Music of What Happens, again, was just such an interesting look at the complicated things that we bring to relationships and how we can use relationships to work out a lot of those complicated things if we are open to the people we fall in love with, which is a great lesson for us all. Bill also has, and in the Q&A we'll talk a little bit about, an incredible book called The Bridge that is coming out in September, which is just one of the most astonishing things I've had the pleasure of publishing. Lucas, we will talk, took a very strange route to publication in the US. A lot of passionate people passing the book one to another until we end up here having a Read with Pride event with Lucas. His book talks about identity, especially under the lens of HIV and living with HIV, which is something that we don't often talk about in our literature, but we must. And he does it in such a humane, funny, and utterly relatable way that really, again, readers are so engaged by it. And it takes us into conversations that teens are having, and if they're not having, they should be having. And then, Leah, I mean, You Should See Me in a Crown. What a difference a week makes, right? I mean, now I can say indie bestseller, You Should See Me in a Crown. BookScan Top 100, You Should See Me in a Crown. It's amazing to see how this book that is so full of joy and just has this just amazing Black queer character at its center has been embraced by so many people. And again, I must admit, the embrace in the wider world does not surprise me because it's a book that was embraced so much first by Leah's amazing editor, Maya, but then throughout Scholastic, it's just the book that brings us joy. So thank you, Leah, for that. And I can't wait to have this conversation. So to start off, I thought I would just ask each of the creators to talk a little bit more about their book now that I've introduced them, but just to sort of say what inspired it, what the book is about and what it means to them, and what they sort of see it adding into the world. So I'll sort of go in order of where I'm seeing you on my screen. So Alice, I'm going to ask you to kick it off.
Yeah, sure. So this is Heartstopper. It's a graphic novel about Nick and Charlie, who are two boys at an all-boys grammar school in England. And they meet, they very quickly become friends, and they soon fall in love. So Heartstopper had a very long route to publication. Basically, it started off, Nick and Charlie were secondary characters in my very first YA novel, Solitaire. And they were a little bit in the story, but you don't really learn much about their personalities compared to the narrator. And after I finished writing that book, I knew that I wanted to tell their story. I felt like they had a story there that just, I couldn't stop thinking about what their story was. So I started to think about how I could tell that story, and eventually I decided to create a comic because I love drawing as well. So Heartstopper was launched as a webcomic in 2016, and it kind of just grew from there. Lots of people started reading it, and in 2018 I decided to self-publish. So I did a Kickstarter and did all of that and self-published the first volume. And after that, I had interest from publishers, and now it's a published book. So yeah, that's kind of the story of how it was created, and it's kind of grown. For me, Heartstopper's kind of branched out from being this story about Nick and Charlie, and I've introduced so many more characters, and now it's kind of this ensemble, almost like a slice of life comic about this group of queer teens in in quite a conservative town in England, and just their friendships and their relationships, and yeah, I love it.
Great. All right, Lucas, tell us about your path to this book.
Yeah, so I finally have my final copy of this book, Where We Go From Here. And it is a book, I like to say, is a book about love, about friendship, and about HIV. It sets in Rio de Janeiro, the city I was born. Now I live in São Paulo. And it tells the story of three main characters with three different points of view. So we have Ian, the first character, who at the beginning of the book, he's at the clinic doing his HIV test, and his results came back positive. And at the clinic, he met Victor, who was also there doing his test, because he found out that Henrique, the third character, he's an HIV positive person also, and they are in a relationship. And Victor are very afraid that he had catch the virus, and he kind of spiraling. But his test came back negative, but he see Ian goes out of the clinic in a very bad shape. So he decides to put Ian and Enrique in touch, because Enrique has HIV for 3 years now. He's a very more mature person, and he can help Ian navigating through these initial fears. And so it's a book that discusses a lot about the HIV inside the LGBTQ plus community. And it's a book that talks a lot about the prejudices that happens inside and outside our community. And the path for them for this book to came across America was very wild, because David was in the Brazilian Book Fair at 2018 when this book came out in Brazil. And my editor gave the book to him and said, like, you should check this book. It's very good. And David was like, but I can't read Portuguese. What am I gonna do with that? But fortunately, he had an editor who can read Portuguese, Orlando. And David gave the book for Orlando. Orlando read it. And a month later, he sent me an email saying that he wanted to publish the book in the US. So I was, what's happening? This is not true, but it all comes to true. And it's here finally, translated beautifully by Larissa Helena, which is also Brazilian, who lives in New York, I guess. And that's it. That's the history.
Awesome. All right, Leah, take it away.
All right, so You Should See Me in a Crown. I often talk about how it rose out of the empty spaces that I saw in YA growing up. So part of the idea of how the story developed after we knew what the story was going to be was to take what is a really quintessentially American idea of like the prom queen, the all-American girl. And so sort of what happens is when you have that image of what the all-American girl is, she's often white, she's often blonde, and even though we don't talk about it, she's almost always rich. And so the idea of You Should See Me in a Crown is to subvert all of those ideas of what it means to be a girl who is worthy of a crown and of attention and of envy even. And so that's where Liz Lighty comes from. She's the main character of the book. Ting. And she is just gonna position that right there. Product placement, we love to see it. And she's queer. She's deeply anxious. She lives in relative poverty. She comes from a sort of non-traditional family background. And so we're just working to subvert all these tropes that appeared in all of my favorite teen comedies growing up. And I'm very fortunate that I have an editor who gets the vision. It was never a question of whether or not we were on the same page in terms of producing a Black girl joy book. And so that's where Crown came from. And its journey into the world is actually not super exciting. I went to grad school, I got an MFA, I got my agent connected me with Maya, and boom, we had a book.
Hey, whatever works. All right, Bill, I know, again, we've sort of progressed in our hearts and minds to the bridge, but let's talk about Music of What Happens. And just
I can remember.
Such a special story.
Okay. Yeah, so the Music of What Happens is what happened when I tried on purpose to write a love story for the first time, because I wrote a love story called Openly Straight, but I didn't mean it to be a love story. So this time I was like, I will write a love story. And what it wound up being about, it's about two boys, Max and Jordan, here in Phoenix, Arizona. You see the blue sky and the cacti behind me. And they meet one summer while working on a food truck. And you know, what I would say about it, what's I think most important about it, is it's really a book about the messages of toxic masculinity and how they land on gay kids. You know, really, Max and Jordan are two sides of me. Max, who is half Mexican, half Irish, is a dude bro. He plays sports. He's out to his straight friends. They're totally fine with it. This is not a book about coming out. It's really a love story about two characters who have already come out. But he's struggling with some of the sort of dude bro issues that have been put in his life, oddly enough, by his father, who is white. He has gotten some machismo talking tos growing up, which is also what happened to me. I was oddly told when I was a kid that it was okay to be gay, but it wasn't okay to be feminine. Interesting message. So that's one thing that Max is trying to deal with. And meanwhile, Jordan is a much more tender boy. He's much more sensitive. He has his two best female friends. And I kind of wanted to subvert that trope a little bit. And so really it's about how sometimes it can be a little bit of a trap to fall into the gay best friend place, because in fact, it isn't really authentic for him. It's just what he does. And so it's about two boys who are lacking something and find that in the other person.
Amazing. All right. Again, I want to encourage all of you, if you have not purchased these books, Print Bookshop has them and they're linked. So please, please, please purchase these books. I will also remind you, if you have questions, we are going to do a Q&A later on in the hour. So if you have questions for any of these authors, just put them in the Q&A spot and I will be going in there shortly to be picking out some questions. But first, I have questions of my own. I'm selfish that way. So again, gonna go back in the same order, just with some one-on-one questions. So start with you, Alice. Again, when we've done events before, I was fascinated to know, again, at first I was like, oh, Alice is writing this boy meets boy story, which is awesome. But I was really fascinated to hear about how it does come from a personal place, and especially it's sort of the setting comes from a personal place. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So like the whole world of Heartstopper is basically the world that I grew up in. Like I went to an all-girls grammar school. A grammar school is just like sort of like in between a really posh school and a standard secondary school, between a private school. And so it was kind of like quite a middle class, like conservative school. And there was really not any like mention of queerness at all. And that's kind of the world that Heartstopper is at the start of the story. Like Charlie is out, but he's the only out kid in school. And he has no support from any teachers or anything like that. So like Heartstopper brings slowly, it starts with Nick and Charlie, and then it brings together all these different queer teens who have all different experiences, and they form this really strong queer friendship group. And that's kind of what I wish I had as a teen, but sadly not.
And what has it been like sort of developing the world, as you said, sort of growing and building other characters besides Nick and Charlie? I mean, over many years, I mean, you've lived in this fictional world. I know that there are many people, some of them in the chat section, who are very passionate about these characters in this world. And so what has it been like sort of once the world was established and you're getting feedback and you're also been living it for a while, how has your relationship with it changed?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, getting to explore all these different characters and bring them into the story has been so much fun. Like, because Nick and Charlie's kind of will they, won't they romance, that's almost like finished, you know, by the start of volume 2. But there's going to be 5 books, so there's a lot more story to tell. And it's been so much fun to expand the world and get to show a little bit of other characters. And it's been really nice that people bonded with these other characters, because I was worried at first that, you know, when I started to introduce the characters, I was like, oh, well, maybe people only care about Nick and Charlie, they won't care about these other characters, but everyone has really, really enjoyed reading about them too, so yeah.
And without there being spoilers, because I know we in the US are a little behind, but I will ask, is there any particular character that surprised you the most, or that you didn't think was going to be a big part of the series and then suddenly is?
Yeah, I think Charlie's friend Tao is a really big part of the story throughout the whole thing. And he starts off as just like kind of the best friend character, but he has his whole journey, and we learn about his friendship with Charlie and how Tao is worried about Charlie, and they can't really communicate with each other because Tao's quite blunt and outspoken. And he's just, you know, I mean, I was scared that people wouldn't like that about him, that he was so kind of forceful and protective of Charlie. But yeah, no, people really enjoyed reading about him, and I've loved writing him.
That's great. All right, so moving on to Lucas. Most first-time writers, when approaching a novel, they write it from one point of view. It's easier that way. You, however, decided, I know, I'll take on 3 different people. So I'm very curious about that, but whether from the very beginning you knew that you were going to have the 3 perspectives, and sort of how you got to know 3 such different vantage points on a similar experience.
So a little secret is that when I first started writing this book, I wasn't outlining anything. I just had this idea when in the first chapter, I wanted to open the book with a character discovering that he now is HIV positive. So I start writing Ian's perspective. And then when I start writing it, I described this blue-haired guy who was sitting next to him, and he was also waiting for his test, but I doesn't know who he is or what he's doing there. So I thought, maybe his character, there's a story behind him too. So in chapter 2, without outlining yet, I start writing about Victor and about why he's at the clinic too. And then I thought to myself, well, he's there because he is or was in a relationship with someone, and who is that someone? And then I came out to Enrique, and that's was kind of the way how I sort out these 3 characters, and then I stopped and outlined it because I do not pencil the whole thing. It's just the 3 first chapters. And while I write it, I thought that I wanted to talk about different things in different perspectives. I wanted to talk a little bit about our Brazilian treatment culture. I wanted to talk about relationships between several different characters. What are the problems that relationships, and I wanted to portray that it's not something that you might die for right now. And I guess that's what happened.
Were any of the 3 harder to write than the others, or easier? Like, was there one you identified with more, or did you sort of separate yourself amongst the 3 of them?
I guess the hardest one to write was Victor, because Victor is the youngest of the 3, and he is the most privileged of the 3. He is the most entitled of the 3, and he's the one who has the more prejudices in his life. He is the non-HIV character of the 3, and he is freaking out. Oh my God, I'm going to catch the virus. What my life will be if I catch the virus. And then he has this whole lot of his family and friends saying, come on, man, chill out a little. Learn a little bit about it, understand a little, get informed. So you will see that it's not a monster, it's not a hydra with 7 heads, you know, it's just something that exists in your life, and you will manage that.
Awesome. No, again, the fact that you pull all 3 of them off so beautifully is just a testament to your talent, sir, and I salute you.
Thank you so much.
All right, so Leah, I mean, again, we've talked about a lot of things with this book, but one part we really haven't talked about a lot, but I love so much about this book, is the family, is the light, and just both. I mean, Robbie, I mean, Robbie. I mean, but also Liz's mom, and just sort of the family dynamic and sort of the family situation, so informed. Obviously, it propels the plot. Liz is trying to become who she is, the prom queen, because of the reward money. But just in general, the dynamic there is both talking about economy and how that fits in the family so much more than we usually see in YA, but also the questions of illness and how illness can both affect a family greatly, but also bring out character in a family too. So I'm wondering how you sort of piece this family together and what they mean to you.
Yeah, so one of the things that I thought was underrepresented also in YA is chronic illness, or inherited illness, I guess is the way I would describe it. So Robbie, Liz's little brother, has sickle cell anemia, and their mother also had it and died quite early from it. So Liz's entire life has been shaped around obligation, and not in a way where she feels like, oh, I owe my family this thing, but she is very driven to protect them because of how much she knows about what could happen if she doesn't. And so she's internalized all these ideas and all these responsibilities about like what her role is within this family. She's like, okay, I'm healthy. I have this ability to play this instrument that can get me a scholarship to college. And that way it takes the pressure off of my grandparents, and it allows me to stay close to home just in case I have to come home for my brother. And I'm going to become a doctor so I can cure sickle cell. All of her goals are incredibly outward facing. And I thought that was something that should be explored, about the ways that teenagers, and I felt this when I was a teenager too, the way that teenagers often feel responsibility to take care of the people who take care of them, and what that looks like when you live in relative poverty, especially. So Liz comes from a family that doesn't have disposable income. Her grandparents who are raising her work. Well, her grandfather doesn't work. He's very sleepy. He's asleep for most of the book, but her grandma works like 12-hour shifts every day. And so Liz is the type of kid who's like, okay, I'm going to make sure there's dinner on the table. I'm going to make sure I also have a part-time job so I can chip into the expenses of the family. My 5th and 6th grade teacher is in the chat. She said that Liz reminds her of me. You're right, Mrs. Peacock. She is very much like me when I was a kid. And so, yeah, and so that was just something that was really important to me. So I think Liz's entire character is shaped around these ideas of responsibility.
Yeah, I think, again, it's conveyed so well. And again, Robbie is such an amazing secondary character. Like every time he's on the page, it's just like, I just love him so much. I'm curious, was there any particular part of the book that was harder to write than the rest of it? Like, was there something you felt was particularly challenging, or really did it all flow as a whole?
Well, it's just my first time ever writing a book, like from beginning to end. So everything was a challenge, but I will say there's, this is not the question you asked me, but this is the question I'm going to answer. The easiest parts to write for me were the relationships between Liz and her little brother, between Liz and her best friend, between Liz and her grandma, because these are relationships that I really understood really distinctly. Her romance with Mac, that was slightly more, it was super fun to write, but it was slightly more challenging for me because I have never been an out queer teen in Nowheresville, Indiana. Whereas like that's an experience that I had to navigate for Liz, but I have been an older sister who felt she needed to take care of her younger sibling. I have been a best friend to someone who like maybe we're drifting apart, but like we're fighting really hard to hold on to it. And I've been the daughter of someone who I love fiercely and would do anything to protect, even though they're at the same time doing everything they could to protect me. And so those things came really easily. Even though I love Mac and Liz's relationship, that was slightly more challenging.
Awesome. I will also close. I've realized in listing your accomplishments at the beginning, I wanted to share with you one of my favorite accomplishments was that preparing for this panel, I just had to look something up. And all I had to do on a book site was type the words "you should." And I was like, there you go, you should.
Wow. That's so funny. I'm so glad that's the...
I love it. Just I thought I'd have to type in some more words. Nope, just you should. That's like our whole marketing campaign right there. Just show that you should.
Honestly, and we love to see it. We really do.
Yeah. All right, so Bill, again, I want to actually pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about The Bridge, because again, it feels like we've been waiting for it to come out forever, and we're still waiting, but it's soon. It's the beginning of September 1st, and so if Music of What Happens was written as a conscious love story, The Bridge is really written consciously to talk about suicidal thoughts and mental health in a very, really, I mean, just moving, understanding, tender, but honest way. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about how your journey to that book and sort of how it sort of grew out of that.
Well, you know, the first 5 books I wrote were really LGBTQ stories that felt super personal to me. And when I was looking for a 6th book, I really couldn't find anything that I needed to say. And then without much thought, I realized that I haven't really come out about my mental illness, about my dealings with depression in the same way. And so I sought to kind of do the same thing and just like, let's explore this. And it was a challenge. You know, what I wrote about are a boy and a girl, both 17 in New York City, who meet atop the George Washington Bridge. And they interrupt each other, and they're both there to jump. They don't know each other. And based on the choice they make up there, the world splits into 4 realities. So I write the story 4 times, and things go very differently based on their choices. In one, the girl jumps, in one, the boy jumps, in the third, they both jump, and in the fourth, neither jumps. And it was a challenge. First of all, it was a challenge for my mental health to write that book, because I had to kind of go and sit in the chair of my depressed young person. And I am somebody who dealt with suicidal ideation. And I did have an attempted suicide when I was 27. So in some ways, it was kind of the book I never wanted to write, but felt like I really needed to write. And I'm so excited to have people read it, and yet we haven't really gotten a lot of people to read it, so it's not out for another 2.5 months.
Yes, but again, when they do, I mean, again, everyone who has read it is just blown away by it. And one of the things I like about it is it sort of does talk about sort of the unpredictability of the paths that we take, and that you can be so certain about something one moment, and then something random can happen and change it. Which seems very, very in step with our times, that sort of letting go about the fact that you can't control the universe around you. I think we've all been wrestling with that immensely. I'm gonna just, overall, I mean, talking about Music What Happens, talking about The Bridge, sort of to segue to sort of the group conversation, I would like for you to talk about, I mean, you've had some amazing experiences sort of showing how writing queer YA can help readers and can give a connection point for readers. And you've had some extraordinary correspondences with readers who've been in very hard situations and have used your books and talking to you to help navigate them. So I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit, about sort of, again, this is one of the things I take the most pride in with queer YA, is that connection with readers. So could you talk a little about your experience with that?
Yeah, and I'm going to speak openly about it in a way I haven't before, really. The thing that I am proudest about too is that to be a mentor for young people. I mean, I feel like a dad now in this room and in all of this. I'm an older guy, and you know, when I was coming up, when I was coming of age in New York City in the 1980s, there was nothing, and I didn't have any resources. And the ways that I navigated were I did the best I could, but it was not healthy for me. And to turn that around and to be somebody who, you know, really wants the best things for young people and could try to really give them everything I have in terms of support and love and my books, feels like I'm done. You know, like that's the one thing that I can say I did in my life, and nothing else happens, I'm good. I had this one young man who I met when he was 14. He had a very harrowing coming out. Not to say too much, but he writes me once a week, and he's now 18, and he's doing really, really well. And it's just a delight to see somebody coming along. And you know, these books matter. They matter a ton for young readers.
No, again, I could not agree more. All right, so I want to open it up again. Everybody, I encourage you to, there is a Q&A bar or button. Please put your questions in the Q&A, and I will start asking them in a moment. The one question I'm going to ask is, because it's Read with Pride, just about the feelings of responsibility you feel when writing about queer characters and sort of putting queer characters out into the world, because I do think all of you write with such sensitivity about them. And so I'm curious, just as creators, what's on your mind almost as you're writing queer novels specifically for teenagers? Anyone can start.
I can dive in.
No, you go, Leo. You go.
Okay. So I was at Well-Read Black Girl Festival last year, I think. And I tell this story a lot. And so anybody who's ever seen me talk about it before, just pretend like this is fresh information. But I was at Well-Read Black Girl Festival last year, and Elizabeth Acevedo was doing a panel where she said, how can I write Black girls with so much care that when they come to the page, they know that I love them? So even if they don't feel seen or loved by the people around them, they know at the very least that on this page, they are loved. And I think that was the most important bit of writing advice I ever received, was that when I sit down to craft these characters, when I work at putting images of queer Black girls into the world, how can I tell queer Black girls who don't feel seen or heard anywhere else in the world that I see them and I hear them, and that if I could make it out the other side with a book deal or two, then they could make it out as well. And so I think about that all the time when I'm writing these characters.
Alice?
Yeah, I mean, with Heartstopper, for me, I'm always trying to write a story about queer joy. And like, I want Heartstopper to feel realistic, but at the same time, I want the angle to be a group of queer teens, you know, having positive, happy experiences. And I think that's what really has drawn people to Heartstopper, because although it does, you know, there are some sad things in it, you know, there's bits of homophobia in it, there's bullying, there's mental health issues. Like, I always try and present everything in a really hopeful light and a really positive way, and focusing on the little moments of joy that you can have amongst all of that. Yeah, and I think that's what has drawn people to the story, and that's what I want to be telling, that's what I want to be giving to queer teens.
Absolutely.
For me, I guess that is a double responsibility, because you not also are writing for young people, but you are also writing for people that are getting his thoughts for information right now. What you write can influence for bad or for good. So I guess that's a very key age for I don't know, 12 to 20 years old. And I advocate always for either a happy ending or looking towards a happy ending. I said that in our last panel, because my book is not a book that talks about a happy subject at the beginning, but I treat it as lightly as I can, because I like to say that this book has a happy ending. I love to spoil that to people. No one dies in this book. It's how I promote it, because when it comes to HIV, all that I read when I was, I don't know, 15, 16, it was either nonfiction or the sad story. And I don't want to tell the sad story anymore, because people living with HIV are the sad ones anymore. People are living their lives as like someone else, just taking a pill a day.
I mean, I would just echo a lot of what I heard. I mean, the word for me has to be hope. You know, when I grew up, there were not books that had a lot of hope for young people. And so to give that hope is really important. And really, I want to echo, you know, what Lucas just said about the bridge, which is, by the way, one of my characters is a gay boy in that book. And I see that book as a hopeful book. I would not want to write a book about suicide that wasn't hopeful. We have to have hope in these times. So that's very important to me.
All right, let us go to the reader questions. I will take this moment again to remind everybody that Print Bookshop has put the buy links into the chat. Maybe we'll do it again. Please support these authors and support print by purchasing these books from print. That said, I will say one of the questions is whether these books are available in the UK, and I'm happy to report Alice's already is, obviously, but Bill's, Leah's, and Lucas's will all be published by year's end. Bill and Leah's by Scholastic UK, Lucas's by David Fickling Books. So again, I urge you to pay whatever steep import price it would be to order from print, but if you need to order it homegrown, I get it. Please, you will have them by the end of the year. All right, first question we have is, which authors or people are the inspirations for the stories that you write?
Tough one.
Yes.
I would have to say, David, I'm sorry, but you were the first queer writer I ever read. Your book was the first YA novel that was translated into Portuguese in Brazil, Two Boys Kissing. So when I read it, it was like, I don't know, I was hit by a train because it's so beautiful, and it's one of my favorite books of all time. So you as inspiration as much as Bill, Alice, and Leah. And I don't know, I have a lot of inspirations. That one singer in Brazil that I address in the book, whose name is Cazuza, which was the first HIV positive person to come out in Brazil in the 80s, 90s. And he is very important for the discussion of HIV in Brazil. And I guess he is an inspiration for this book specifically and overall for life, because his music is amazing. And check it if you don't know him.
Yeah, I think music totally counts as inspiration. All right, who's next?
Are we asking about inspiration for specific characters or for the story?
You can answer any which way you interpret it. It was a very vague question, so take it how you interpret it.
Okay, I love this. All right, so one of my major inspirations, and I think it's kind of obvious, I showed my hand a little bit. One of my major inspirations is John Hughes movies. I was a huge fan when I was in high school, and they kind of shaped my idea of like what coming of age movies and stories were supposed to look like. And so that weaves its way into this book. I talk a lot about how I was a Sarah Dessen stan growing up. And so I wanted to capture that same like lightness and warmth that exists in her books, but I wanted to give those things to Black girls because her books were all white, because Sarah's white, so it makes sense. And I would also say that as of like right now, people that I'm reading who are really shaping the way that I understand romance, but also the way I understand like contemporary Black literature. Nicola Yoon, first of all, beautiful, beautiful romance writer. Nick Stone, who is just the coolest human being on the planet. Mm-hmm. Elizabeth Acevedo. I'm really grateful that I get to write at the same time as these absolute like giants of YA. Yeah, but if you wanted to ask about the characters, like who the characters are inspired by, I have a lot of like a lot of friends who are really into astrology and like kind of woo-woo. And those characters all poured together to make one of the best friends in the book. And so every time one of them reads it, they're like, was this, you were trying to be funny? Yes, I was.
One of the fun parts of being an author is to do that to your friends. Right, Alice or Bill?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, when I was a teenager, I basically read every single manga in the school library, which was just all like teen romance manga. It was like Fruits Basket kind of genre. And I just read everything that they had. And I feel like that is probably what kicked off my love for graphic novels. So yeah, that's definitely my choice.
You know, that when I think about the initial LGBTQ books that I read, the authors are Armistead Maupin, Alice Walker. Probably The Color Purple was the first book that was queer that I read. And these books absolutely impacted me and made me want to write these stories. Turned out that there weren't really a lot of young adult stories at that time, so I went in a different direction.
Cool. And I'm going to combine two questions here because I think they have a similar realm of answer, which is, what would you like to see more in queer literature? And what are some of the things you hope for with the future of queer books? So sort of what needs to be there, and do you hope to be there in the near future?
Yeah, so I talk about this often about how I want to see a future for queer literature that involves more messy queer kids. I think, especially for Black characters, whether they're queer or not, we're held to an unreasonable standard of excellence, that like the character themselves has to be excellent, the book has to be excellent, there's no room for mediocrity, and that's something that translates out into the world as well. But the thing that I would really like to see is like queer kids who don't have everything figured out, they make mistakes, they make out with a lot of people. You know, I think that I got to read a ton of those filled with messy white girls growing up. Give me a messy queer Black girl, okay? That's what I want for the future. Also, just more Black queer YA in general. I shouldn't look around and be able to name on two hands like how many stories I can pull from the past couple of years. That's not enough anymore.
Yeah.
It never was.
Yeah.
I think that, can I go?
Yeah.
I think that I would love to see a lot more about the whole spectrum of LGBTQ, you know, the Q specifically. There's a lot of experiences, there's a lot of different points of view, there's a lot of different romantic versus sexuality. There's a lot room to explore how those lives are lived and not just gay, cis, heteronormative people. I would love to see a lot more about trans characters by trans authors, by people of color, by different countries. I would love to see a lot of more books from different countries translated in English, because it is a universal language, sort of speak, because there's a lot of people who can read in English. So I want to see those voices hitting the marketing and hitting the New York Times bestseller lists. And I think that bring those discussions, you know, and I would also love to see the story that doesn't need to, we have to come a point where the coming out doesn't have to be the story anymore. You know, I read once in the Jonathan Van Ness biography that he said that he would love to portray a beautiful and happy story, but his life isn't happy in his totality. So I'd love to see the story of some author, of some characters, that it is happy from the beginning until the end, and it's just messy.
I love that messy came up twice. I think that's telling right there. We need to,
me and Lucas are on the same wavelength. I love that for us.
I think that's a good point. And so many of these things that have been done, but haven't been done in LGBTQIA yet. And that's where we're going. And I also think, you know, it must be said, you know, that there are new and emerging voices that really need to be heard right now. And I'm really, really excited to see more, you know, Black, Indigenous, people of color authors who are writing queer lit. That's very exciting, and more, please. You know, let's see what happens.
You've all stolen all my answers. I think just to add, like, just from a comics perspective, like, I'd love to see more like LGBTQ plus graphic novels. Like, there's not that many still. Like, I feel like YA graphic novels are just sort of coming into popularity. And like, being in the indie comic scene, I just know so many illustrators and webcomic artists who write LGBTQ plus teen stories that would make such amazing YA graphic novels, but there just still aren't that many published these days. So hopefully more in the future. That'd be good.
Absolutely. All right, we're getting to the point where we, of course, have 10 minutes and suddenly there's like a deluge of really good questions. So I apologize ahead of time for people who wrote really good questions that we're not going to get to. I like this one, so I'm going to go with it. Can you each talk about the communities your characters are a part of in your books? and how that sense of community can perhaps be stifling but also uplifting?
Okay, I love this question. So I'm going to take it first.
Cool.
Here we go. Okay, so Liz comes from a really small, very white town in the Midwest. It's rural adjacent. I like to describe it because it's peppered with cornfields, but you could still like drive 10 minutes and I don't know, go to a movie theater. I don't know how real small towns look, but so it's very much Liz is isolated in this community because of her Blackness, because she lives in relative poverty, and because she's queer. And those are all things that I understood really acutely because I come from a fairly small Midwestern hometown where I know even now in my adulthood, navigating this space as an openly queer person presents its challenges. And because I'm Black and queer, that adds intersections on top of intersections that make things even more difficult. And so when I wrote Liz's character, I wanted to write a book about Black queer joy, but I also could not shy away from how being from a community like this affects your ability to move freely or move happily. And so, yeah, that's how the community shaped the story really early on.
Yeah, I wrote 3 different characters, and the 3 of them are in very different community stages. Enrique is very immersed in the queer community. He has a best friend who's a drag queen. Ian does economics for his college, and he just walks with a lot of straight guys. And Victor has a lot of support in his house, in his family. He's out since he was born. He doesn't have the out talking, but he's still very biased and very prejudiced. So I guess I like to think that community is something that saved my life. So when I discovered my community, I was able to go out of my house and I was able to talk to people. I was out very late after college. So because I have this gigantic family, very Catholic, very conservative. But once I found my community, and I like to put that in the book, is what might save you if you are willing to be part of that, and if you are willing to stay with these people who are somehow your family, becomes your family, not by blood, but by choice.
Should I move on to the next one to get some more in, or do you, Bill or else? Okay, all right. But everyone will have to answer this one. There are 2 more that I will get to. This one's hard. So I apologize because I'm going to ask the question. You guys will be like, oh, man. Or maybe it'll come to you quickly. If you had to pick one song to be the theme song for your book, what would it be?
I'll go first because I already chose it. It's a song called "It's Only Life." It's from the band The Sheens, and there's a passage where the song talk. I've been down this very road you walking on. It doesn't have to be so tired and lonesome. So I guess that's how, I don't know. It summarizes so much of the book.
You know, I happened to sit down. This is not a prop I meant to have, but in my book, The Music of What Happens, Jordan is this big 80s music freak. And this song plays at one point. And yeah, that's the 45 cover of Hold Me Now by the Thompson Twins. And yeah, that song.
Mine, I mean, I have a Heartstopper Spotify playlist, which I listen to very frequently. And one of my favorite songs on there is Everywhere by Fleetwood Mac. I just feel like that's such a good teen romance song. Yeah, okay, good. That's my choice.
I mean, the book is named after a song by Billie Eilish, You Should See Me in a Crown. So that would be a pretty natural choice. But I want to throw in this one as a last minute ringer. There's a song called Idle Town by Conan Gray, and it's about he grew up in a small town in Texas, but it's extremely You Should See Me in a Crown vibes. I would go listen to it if you want to feel in your small town feels.
What's the title again?
Idle Town.
Good.
All right, then last question, again, is usually my last question, but a couple of people have asked it. So I'm going to ask it, but then subcategorize it so you can give more than one answer. because a few people have asked sort of for queer books that you would recommend to teens that bring you joy. And a couple of people asked for even for younger books too. So sort of for like an 11 to 13-year-old, what book would you recommend as well? I mean, again, I think that 11, 13-year-old could probably read Heartstopper, could probably read You Should See Me in a Crown. Probably couldn't read Lucas's or Bill's books yet. They have to get a little older for that. But so opening it up to anybody, just books that bring you queer joy, and then specific recommendations for that younger teen or just about to be teen in a queer space.
Yeah, so my suggestion, my rec for younger queer titles, I would go to anything by Case and Calendar. So my personal favorite, not Felix Ever After, that's YA. King and the Dragonflies is an absolutely gorgeous book. Young readers, old readers, middle-aged readers, I don't know, everybody should pick that book up. As for YA, I will recommend this book until I can't recommend books anymore, and that's Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alard-Sainz. That's like a masterclass in YA in general, but also just beautiful expressions of tenderness and queerness and finding your identity. I cannot speak highly enough about that book.
This is why you want to go first with that question, because then, you know, Kaysen and Benjamin get pulled out there. I'll add Alex Gino. You know, George has to be named. There's joy there. It's a lovely book.
Bill, you stole my answer, because I would recommend George also by Alex Gino for younger readers. And for YA, I would recommend I Will Forever Stand, my Brazilian friend Vitor Martins, who's gonna put Here the Whole Time on the World in November from Scholastic. And I will also like to recommend Like a Love Story by Abdi Nazemian, which is a beautiful, beautiful book. I said that I'm very tired of reading books about the AIDS crisis, but this one is one of those books that you will read and that you will laugh, you will cry, you will crawl in your bed in fetal position. And it's just so beautiful, and I recommend this forever.
I would recommend for younger readers, there is a British author called Simon James Green who writes gay romance books for slightly younger teens. And they're just so funny, like they're ridiculous and silly, and just if you need something to read for like 2 hours and just completely take you out of your mind, like they're great. And for YA, I would recommend Laura Dean keeps Laura Dean keeps breaking up with me. Long title. By Mariko Tamaki. And it's basically this story of a lesbian relationship that's emotionally abusive. And it's a graphic novel. And it's just so beautifully drawn and like beautifully told. Yeah, it's one of my favorite YA graphic novels. It's really good.
Amazing. I could talk to you guys forever, but unfortunately we're now like over time. And like Alice has to go to bed. Like, I thank you for staying up, Alice, for this. I know the time zone wise. Again, though, I want to close with a couple of things. The first is, again, please support print and support these authors and buy so many books. Perfect for summer reading, perfect for any really gift you want. Surprise your father for Father's Day with a collection of these books. So again, thank you so much to Print for having us. And I will be back. We have more Read with Pride panels. Some of the authors, Case and Calendar and Alex Gino, I almost put them together as one name right just there, are going to be here. Vitor Martins is going to be here to talk about Here the Whole Time. So if you go to the I Read YA page on really anywhere, any social media you want, go to I Read YA. You will find the full listing of all the Read with Pride events. The next one, I believe, is a week from today, and you'll be able to find the list of which authors are coming. So again, thank you so much for coming. Thank you to the authors so much for coming and for talking and for showing their pride. And again, thank you to everyone who tuned in and supported us in the Pride The work still needs to be done, but luckily we have lots of writers like this who are broadening what queer YA is, so that so many people can be included. All right, that is all for now.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say real quick, because I did see a couple people mentioning that they want to get them for their classrooms. If you order through a print a bookstore and you mention in your order comment that you are buying for classroom use, we'll be able to offer you an educator discount on that. So please make sure that you mention that. And I just wanted to say once again, thank you all so much for this amazing panel. Thank you to Scholastic for reaching out to us about it. It was an utter delight and the perfect way to spend my evening.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
You-
Bye, everybody.
Bye.